Okay, folks, good evening. One more time, if you can give me a thumbs up that you can hear me again. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Um, just so everybody's aware, we are recording this so that we can share this out and put it on our website. So just wanted to let everybody know that. And my name is Jeff Muir. I'm the Director of Coaching and Player Development for Missouri Youth Soccer. And I'd like to, first of all, thank you for your patience. I apologize for the technical delay we had there. I think we've got Tom and Paul are on, and the last member of their team just joined. So when I talked to Tom, who's with BJC, and I'll turn this over to him in just a moment, we started to talk about some of the topics that we thought we could, as with a partnership with BJC, that we could cover to push out information to our members and make their lives hopefully a little safer and a little bit better. And recovery was certainly one of the topics that came up. Having coached for almost 30 years and run a club, work with the Olympic Development Program, coached high school, there are lots and lots of opportunities for these kids to play today, more probably now than ever. And one of the things we all have to be aware of, whether it's coaches, parents, players, is recovery and how do we handle the schedules that we get. Because there's a certain need for our bodies to recover in order for us to be able to perform at our peak. So Tom has assembled a team, and I'll let him introduce them in just a moment. And he's got some information that they will pass out to us and let us know, hopefully give us some information that we can share with our kids, and or if your players are on here this evening, they'll take something away from this and it will help them in their performance, help keep them safe. So Tom, if you want to unmute yourself, I did hit share screen, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for having us. I'll go ahead and start off by kind of introducing everyone. I'm Tom McGowan. I'm an athletic trainer with St. Louis Children's Hospital in the Young Athletes Center. We also have Paul Jenkins, who's a physical therapist at the Young Athletes Center, Gabby Herrick, which is also a physical therapist at the Young Athletes Center. And then we also have Rachel Parks, who's a registered dietitian for St. Louis Children's Hospital. So we're gonna kind of go through and talk about what kind of activities, obviously pre and post game activities, what to do in between games, and then a little bit about sleep, as well as nutrition, obviously, is a big topic as well. So all of these topics are meant to kind of maximize or optimize your recovery. And, it's not necessarily a one size fits all, but hopefully we can help tailor each individual program for you and your athletes as well. So,
Tom, excuse me for just 1 second. If I could just point out to folks as we go through this, if you'd like to throw questions in the chat box, I'll check them. And at the end, we'll spend some time answering any questions, and we'll also open up the floor for everybody. So, all right, Tom, thanks.
Yeah. So I will share my screen real quick. And let's see. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. So as you can see, we're talking about sports recovery. Everybody's name is listed on here as well. But we'll kind of get right into kind of talking about pregame activity and warming up, which I can touch on real quick, but I think Paul is going to kind of lead us off here. So pregame activity, our last actual educational class was about the FIFA 11 warm-up. So obviously with pregame, we want you to do a dynamic warm-up and kind of a dynamic stretch routine. So that's a little bit different than your static stretching that typically happens at the end of games and we'll touch more on that a little bit. But if you want to know more about the FIFA 11 Plus program, you can definitely look back at MISA's website for our previous recording about warming up. Obviously, dynamic warm up gets the muscles warm and a lot of blood flow to the muscles. So that's the most important thing. That's the best way to warm up, is by actually moving. And then proper nutrition and hydration are a big kind of aspect of pregame activity, which Rachel will talk about that later on. And also having a plan. So arriving prepared and reducing that stress. So there's a lot more talk nowadays about mental health. So that includes stress. So as a player, when I was younger, I always had a game day checklist of, things that I want to pack in my bag, or something that I want to pull out to eat to take with me, whether that's, a Gatorade or a banana or something like that. I always had kind of a checklist to go through. And then also being efficient in time management. So if you're running late, you're going to feel a lot more stressed. So making sure you're having a plan ahead of time on when you're leaving and how to get there, and how much time that's going to take is an important aspect to think about before the game as well. All those can kind of factor into how you play on the field. So after we do some of the pregame stuff, the game happens, and we can start talking about the postgame activity. And I'll switch over to Paul. You can kind of talk.
All right, trying to get my camera going here again. Let's see.
We've got you now, Paul.
Oh, I guess don't you necessarily need to see me. So as Tom was already saying, those of you that heard our talk last time, what we talked a lot about, that was the dynamic warm-up and went through the FIFA 11 Plus. What we're looking at in terms of this time, we want to talk a little bit more about what do you do after a game, and especially the situations where you have those tournaments. We're going to have game after game after game. So there's that brief time in between. So this is the time when static stretching would kind of be a much more advantageous. This is when you've taken the muscles through a long workout. They've been playing hard on this field, and now we want to really maximize their length and their recovery position so that when they get ready to go again, you're going to have the most flexibility possible. So when we look at static stretching, it's kind of gotten a bad rap recently when some of the research came out that suggested that it really shouldn't be done before games and that it's not really giving you that injury prevention benefit. And what we really know from that is that having good flexibility is what was really going to reduce the likelihood of injuries when you get out there. But doing some stretching is not going to give you good flexibility. That's where the dynamic warm-up is really a better means of getting you to your maximum available flexibility. But after you've done your workouts, that's where the static stretch will help to really gain some flexibility, gain some length in those muscles. So did a quick check of the research out there recently to prepare for this and to see what's really the go-to for the best duration for how long to hold a stretch. And the answers are all over the place. So what we do know is that the range is from about 30 seconds to about 90 seconds seems to be shown to be really effective. And kind of the bare minimum is that you need to get kind of to an additive 1 minute. So if you want to go with 30 seconds and do a couple of repetitions of that, that'll get you there. But those 10-second stretches that we were kind of taught as children, a lot of the coaches at least, really aren't going to cut it, because when you place a muscle on stretch, it's going to tend to take about 8 to 9 seconds of trying to resist that before it actually relaxes and gives into that stretch. So when you're doing your stretches, you want to kind of pick a few key muscle groups to look at. And then from there, you want to go ahead and do some stretches and hold them for a long enough time. These are easy to do while you're having your sum up of what happened in the game, kind of get everybody around and go through a few static stretches. If you don't do that as a team, that's something that the players should probably take on their own before they're going to be getting ready to do that. You want to have at least about a 2-hour gap before you're going to be playing again, if you're going to do these, though, before you get ready to play. So I think that's what we wanted to do with next. And then we want to kind of do some demonstration of a couple of the key stretches that we were talking about. So I'm going to head out here with Gabby and get off my mic.
So we got 4 stretches that we'd like to go over and demonstrate today. So we're looking at targeting 4 major muscle groups. So starting with hip flexors here, Paul's going to be in a half kneeling stance. What we mean by that is that his front leg is leading there and 90-degree angle, and back leg is behind him also at a 90-degree angle. So for this one, Paul has his hands on his hips, so it's a good place to start for finding where our pelvis is at in space. So for this one, a lot of common misconception or errors can be kind of overstriding for this one. So you see a lot of people really lunging forward, almost over lunging, not really getting a true good, nice static stretch of the hip flexor. So what we want to do here is keep our pelvis in a good neutral position like Paul is doing. Even actually tilt back a little bit, engaging the core muscles and the glutes a little bit. And then we're holding this position here. So what you should feel is a good stretch in the front of the leg right in here. So we're actually getting our pelvis in a good spot there until you can feel the good stretch here. And then we're holding, like Paul said, into that duration, a couple of sets of 30 seconds, all the way up to 60-second holds here. So Paul's kind of showing some rotational errors that can be seen here in order to get more range. People can kind of open up a little bit too much. You can see a lot of back extension sometimes, and then like I showed earlier, kind of some overstriding. So all of those we want to really minimize and working more in that neutral position, like I said, that'll give you the best stretch of the hip flexor there. So then you would switch legs and try your other leg there. So that's going to be our first stretch going over hip flexors. Our next one we'll go ahead and transition into standing here, Paul. So next one we're going to do is for the quad muscle. So that's what we're trying to do here. Like Paul is doing here, he's got a nice neutral pelvis again. So keeping his leg directly behind him. Again, a lot of times you can see kids, really anyone kind of having their leg all the way out here, all the way tucked in. We really want the leg to stay nice and neutral right behind him. Again, not overstriding here, leaning back with a lot of back extension. So you can see people really lean forward. So we want to maintain our good core control here, and then holding this position for the quad stretch. Good job there. Well, next one we'll go is to the ground. So we're going to do a figure 4 on hamstrings. Paul's got one leg tucked in here. He's reaching out for the opposite leg. What we're targeting here is the muscle on the back of the leg. So he's going to be reaching out kind of to touch the toes of his other leg. Again, for this one, common here, overreaching with the back here. So getting more of a stretch in the low back. But we're really targeting the back of the leg. So making sure, again, our hips are more neutral. Anything from the hips here and then getting a good stretch in the back of the leg. So Paul's doing a good job with that one. Definitely being aware of where your back is in space for this one. We definitely don't want to overstretch our back for this one. We really want to make sure we're getting the right muscle group. And then our last one here, we're going to transition for a calf stretch. So the gastroc muscle and the soleus muscle are on the back of the leg. We're targeting the gastroc muscle with this one. So like Paul's doing a good job. He's keeping his heel down here and reaching for the ground with his back leg, getting a nice stretch in the posterior leg there. So this is a good one to get a good stretch there, leading into the ankle. And again, another common misconception with this one is arching the back too much and it hits maybe up too high. Heel. So good key for that one is to kind of keep your heels to the ground there. I think we were also going to briefly go over foam rolling next. So we had the same targeted muscle groups for foam rolling. Similar research out there for holds, the foam rolling. So these can be really great to pack in your personal bag as you're leading out to a tournament or after gameplay. Coaches can also pack these too. So what Paul is showing you first is going to be for the quads there. So you want to actually lay on top of the foam roll with all of your body weight. That way you're getting an actual soft tissue kind of massage there. So doing this for a soft tissue release, Paul's doing a great job there of keeping, again, a neutral spine and core is engaged so we're not overarching our back again. He's getting out good quad massage there. Next one we'll do, we're going to go ahead and rise up to the hip flexors. So just a little bit more proximal near the corner, getting the hip flexors right in here. So I think he has some keys to stop it there, but he's doing a good job really targeting the hip flexors in the front of the hip there. Same idea there where you want to place your full weight through the foam roll and then kind of hold on spots that you find to be more tender. Same thing here, we'll hold it for 30 seconds to get on each of these muscle groups. We'll go ahead and switch over here. We'll do the hamstrings. So this one's kind of easier. We find to put both legs on the foam roll Then you're going to be rolling back and forth on the hamstring muscle group like Paul's doing. Sometimes it's easier, like he's doing, to engage in the core, using the arms to help give you some momentum back and forth. Full body weight through the foam roll again to give you some of those deeper tissues. So that's good there. And then last one would be the calves. So sometimes this one's a little bit harder to coordinate. If you find it's challenging to do both legs at once, you can kind of go on the edge more and try one leg and push off with your other one like Paul's doing. Just as long as you're getting sufficient body weight kind of through the foam roll so that it's mobilizing the tissues appropriately. So those are kind of our top mobility exercises we wanted to hit today, and kind of some common errors that can be found in instructions. We really want to take our time with these, make sure we're doing a good job of targeting the correct muscle groups for each one of them.
Yes.
So I will kind of go back and let you guys kind of see these slides as well, as far as what to do with that. So we kind of have a definition for static stretching, and then kind of your frequency and duration, and then muscle groups, something to avoid. And then we also include some benefits down at the bottom there as well. So increased flexibility, reduced injury risk, faster recovery, and decreased muscle soreness. And then coupling that with foam rolling, some of the same stuff, 2 to 3 sets of 30 seconds, same core muscle groups in the lower body. Things to avoid are rolling over joints or sensitive tendons. So a lot of times IT bands can be pretty sensitive, or once you get onto the hamstring or quad tendon. So really staying in the muscle belly is where you want to focus. And then also those help increase flexibility and decrease muscle soreness as well. In between games, so we want to talk a little bit about what to do in between games. So really you want to focus on kind of relaxing and refueling in between games. Some light activity such as walking, or some of the stretching that we just mentioned. You don't want to do it right before a game, but obviously after one game and before the other one. And then activities to avoid. Just some examples here, obviously high energy activities. So running, jumping, swimming, outdoor activities, especially in the heat or sun. So going to sporting events, baseball games, amusement parks, and then high cognitive or stressful activities. So again, we want to touch on that mental health. We want our athletes to be cognitively functioning at their highest level. So try to avoid, stressful homework or tests in between games. Amusement parks, sometimes the fear level and stress can go up, when riding rides or, attractions. If somebody's afraid of heights, don't take them to the arch in between games, kind of thing. So those are just some general rules to follow, and then also sleep recovery as well. So just going to touch a little bit on the recommendations for athletes. So the average person, so ages 18 to 65, recommended 7 to 9 hours per night. For athletes, it's a little bit higher, so about 2 hours more. Recommended 9 to 11 hours per night. So essentially what that does is that initiates the recovery and repairing process in the body, so that their muscles can start to recover, and also their brain can start to recover. So stronger cognitive ability, which we talked about earlier, and that improves decision making, which can improve play as well. So overall, better sleep habits increases athletic performance. And also be sure to give yourself plenty of time to get adequate sleep, but also enough time to get proper nutrition. So Rachel will talk a little bit about the time before an event when you need to eat, and what you should eat. But you also have to factor in sleep beforehand. So if you're cutting off your sleep to get up and eat, then, there's kind of give and take there. And with that, we will go right into nutrition and hydration.
All right. So recovery, nutrition actually starts before the activity because a well-nourished, well-hydrated body is more resilient and has the building blocks to start recovering from your activity right away. So when we think about timing for nutrition before exercise, most people feel the best when they have a balanced kind of regular meal 3 to 4 hours before. And then in the 30 to 60 minutes before, they have kind of a top off the tank type snack. And the type of foods that give us quick energy that are easy to digest are going to be those carbohydrate snacks. So those are going to be fruits, grains like bars, crackers, cereal. Some people can do dairy before exercise. Those also have carbohydrates. Some people kind of need to stay away from dairy. So a lot of individual variability there, but you can kind of play around with some of that timing and see what works best for you and your athletes. And then also thinking about hydration. We always, take a bottle to the field, but really hydration for recovery starts in the morning when we get up and kind of throughout the day, having a bottle with us all day long because we want to have our urine as we go into exercise be light colored. On the right, you can see a chart there. And when I'm working with athletes in the clinic, I usually say, we want your urine to look like diluted lemonade. We want it to look clear to light yellow. If it's starting to look like apple juice or darker, then we've not had enough water and we need to get a couple bottles down before we think about doing strenuous exercise. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So what does that balanced meal beforehand look like? This is a plate from the US Olympic dietitians that they put together for athletes on hard training days or game days. And you can see the base of the plate there is those grains, those energy foods. So fruit, grains, breads, pastas, rices, and then a little bit of protein and some veggies. But like I said, those grains and carbohydrates really fuel us up and get us ready to go. All right, next slide. So during a competition or during practice, if the exercise is less than 90 minutes, water is number one, and we have enough stores of nutrients in our body to do just fine. If the game is going to be 90 minutes or longer, both physical performance and also mental performance are sustained if we have some kind of carbohydrate source. So that can be a sports drink, it can be a fruit, it can be a bar, a gel. Again, these are things that you can kind of play around with. I know some teams do applesauce cups or some do juice cups or, the athletes bring their own or coaches provide them. There's a lot of different ways to get that in. But over those 90-minute marks, people kind of start to sag and we can see both higher risk of injury and also poor decision-making, as well as just worse physical performance as far as stamina and speed toward the end of the game if we are running low on those carbohydrates. Next slide. So then post-game, really the nuts and bolts of the recovery piece of this. Research has shown, especially for athletes who are going to be doing multiple competitions on the same day, or they're going to come back within the next 12 hours for another practice or another game, there's kind of this window of 30 to 60 minutes afterwards where if we eat and refuel in that window, we're better prepared when we come back in that short time frame. So there's 4 R's for recovery. I will not take credit for this. This is again from one of the US Olympic handouts, but I think it's a really nice way to sum it all up. So the first R is replenish glycogen, and glycogen is stored carbohydrates in our muscle. Carbohydrates, the amount is 15 to 60 grams, and that kind of depends on the activity that was done, but mostly the size of the athlete. So 15 grams, just for reference, is the amount in 1 slice of bread. So you can take a look at the packages and see kind of how many carbs are in some of your snacks that you like having afterwards. So carbs, and then we also need protein to repair the muscles. And that's based on body weight. So 0.3 grams per kilo. So for most athletes, ends up being approximately 15 to 25 grams, depending on the size. So pairing both the carb food and the protein food gives us better recovery doing both rather than just eating protein afterwards, just having a plain chicken breast that's 100% protein. It's better to do something that's a mix. So that's why you hear chocolate milk oftentimes as a recovery drink, is because it's got both the carbs from the milk and the sugar and then the protein. So rehydrate, again, the chocolate milk has fluids in it, but any fluids will work: water, Gatorade, juice. You can get fancy and weigh athletes before and after exercise to figure out how much sweat they lost. And then there's some calculations to do on exactly how much water to drink. You don't need to get that fancy. Just having a bottle available, drinking to thirst. If it was a super hot day or a really long exercise, just continuing to drink until we see that urine color come back into that light yellow range. And then the last R is reinforce. So this is kind of something that's happening more on the cellular level. So really pulling in those foods that we think of as health promoting foods, the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the healthy fats, because we can have improved kind of microscopic cellular repair if we have all the tools, all the building blocks to do those things. And so it's not about just getting whatever carbs in that we want, but really being thoughtful about quality also helps speed recovery. Next slide. So this is, I think, a really nice little snapshot of, okay, we have a competition, we're going to be doing multiple games, and how much should we eat based on kind of the time between games. So if there's less than an hour between events, then most people feel the best if they just do water or sports drinks. If they're going to have to get back out there, having much more than that or a very, very light snack can lead to kind of a sluggishness or stomach cramps. If there's an hour or two, a small snack, a bar, or some fruit plus some fluids. If it's more than 2 hours before the next game, most athletes can stomach kind of a bigger snack and something that has protein in it. So maybe a turkey sandwich or a peanut butter sandwich or chocolate milk or fruit or yogurt. And then obviously if there's 24 hours or more, they can just have a good snack after they get off the field and then kind of go back to their typical meal and snack schedule. Again, as I said before, a lot of this is really individualized, and some people will find that this amount of food is not enough for them. Some will find that they need to have a little bit less based on their tolerance. So it's a great idea to practice your game day fueling on a practice day to kind of see how things settle in your stomach. And then you'll kind of know what things work, what timing works on game days, and not have that be a surprise. All right, next slide. And so then just thinking about nutrition on the road, packing plenty of snacks and drinks. And this is both from the athlete perspective and also the coach perspective. But just making sure you're not leaving it up to the gas stations or the fast food restaurants or somebody else's mom to bring a snack that you like, but coming prepared with foods that work for you. Looking up nearby options, what's going to be close to the field, what's going to be close to the hotel if you're staying overnight, what would be good choices if there are athletes that have dietary restrictions, what's going to work for them, just being really thoughtful and organized and prepared for where the food's going to get procured from. Planning out an eating schedule. This can be tricky if you're in kind of a pool play situation going into a tournament and then there's going to be championship games. But as best as you can, kind of figuring out when the games are going to be and how to time food in between them. And then again, like I said, sticking to familiar choices. Fatty foods are the slowest to empty out of our stomachs. So really rich ice creams, fried foods, things like the fettuccine Alfredo, sometimes those just don't settle very well and can cause more problems during games. And same with spicy foods. Nobody wants to be out on the field burping and having reflux. So again, kind of going back to old standbys that the athlete is trained with or that the team kind of always goes to. There's kind of a nice predictability if your team kind of always eats at a handful of restaurants if you eat out, so the athletes kind of know what's on the menu and know what to expect. All right.
All right, thank you, Rachel. I'm gonna stop sharing real quick, and I'm gonna actually upload some of the resources that you talked about in the chat. That way people can kind of access those resources. So give me 1 second here to see if I can get this figured out.
Would this be a good time for me to throw out a couple of questions to the?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Yeah, there's one of the questions that is in had to do with the number of games kids play in tournament weekends, and we know that in the soccer world there can be 3 to 4 matches within 36 hours. I know that my perspective on that is that that's not a healthy environment. Um, we're taking our Olympic development program kids this weekend to an event, and grateful for the fact that we'll play 1 game per day over 3 days, which is a little better, not ideal. I know that what I've heard is that for complete recovery for somebody who's stressed their body out 100% through a match is 72 to 96 hours. Obviously, you're not going to get that even in the scenario that we're going to experience this weekend, where there's 1 game every 24 hours. So I think the idea is that we try to maximize how we can recover or how our body can recover, and the topics that you and your team have spoke about so far, the sleep, the nutrition, pre-game, post or during, and then post-game, the hydration, the post-game activities of stretching. Those are things that can help get us there a little quicker. We won't, obviously, if it's 72 hours for a complete recovery, but do you guys have, you or anyone on your team have any other thoughts on that? I know it's not a healthy activity. In fact, when I was running a club, there are some benefits, certainly socially, to traveling with your team and the team bonding and the camaraderie. But we really tried to limit that to once per season, because it's just not very good for players to be participating in 3 to 4 games in 36 hours. And they certainly become, the bodies get more stressed, they become more prone to injury. So do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that you kind of touched on it. I mean, I think we're in general as a culture in sports overloading these young athletes for multiple games and competitions within a short time frame. Um, I know that there's even been talks in like the NCAA level where they're talking about taking soccer to fall and spring season, to kind of spread out the games even for them. Instead of having 2 games in a weekend, then they can kind of spread out and have 1 game a week. And that's really, I mean, where the research is pointing towards, is to lessen the games. But another way that we can kind of help our athletes out as adults and coaches is watching kind of that training load. Like you mentioned, the more that they're exposed to a sport, the more likely they are to get injured. So if we can kind of watch how much we're pushing them during the week, if we know that there's going to be a heavy, couple of weekends ahead, then we can kind of tailor our practices and schedules to help them recover a little bit better.
Which really gets into the topic of periodization and the different types of loads that we put onto players heading into competition, and how you taper into that with the amount of load that you put on them. So that's a whole nother topic, probably maybe maybe 4 weeks worth. There's a lot to periodization, but it's something that as athletes become more serious, and as coaches, we certainly need to educate ourselves in that area so that we can take care of our athletes and keep them safe.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Okay, we've got another question in here, and I see that you were able to, in the chat, you put the attachments in there. Thank you for doing that. Somebody has asked about very young athletes and dynamic warm-ups. There might not be a need for them, they've heard. Is this true? And if so, what ages would you recommend at young athletes starting to do dynamic warm-ups?
So I have not heard that. And all the research that we have for FIFA 11 goes pretty much, they have a FIFA 11 kids version as well. And that goes all the way down to, I think, 6 or 7 years old. So I think younger than that, you can still get away with doing a dynamic warm up and it's not going to cause any harm. And you can kind of work in some balance and jumping activities to start getting them training for more functional and high level play.
Okay, great. Should I give you the last question here before you continue on, Tom, or you want me to hold off on this one?
You can give me another question.
Okay. In order to maximize lactic acid removal after a match, what should the work rate be and for how long?
I don't know. I will defer to maybe Rachel on this one.
I guess I don't understand the question as far as the work rate. What is the, not sure exactly what we're referencing there.
If you want to clarify that in the chat, that would be great. We'll certainly do our best to answer that question. Can you talk, Rachel, about lactic acid removal and at all, just generally what that entails? And
I mean, lactic acid is a byproduct, obviously, that builds up in our bloodstream when we're doing anaerobic exercise. And so this would be more, less of a nutrition piece because this is more physiology and our body clearing that and what kind of exercises, what kind of like warm down exercises, I think, is Thomas, is kind of relative to maximum heart rate. So kind of actually asking what intensity of exercise helps clear lactic acid. So I'm going to toss this back to my exercise colleagues.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of what we went over with post-activity stretching and foam rolling can definitely help with that lactic acid and decreasing soreness. As far as what should the work rate be and for how long, I'm not sure of specifics on that necessarily.
great, thanks for that information. And I think we've hit every question that's in there up to this point. Do you have more of a presentation, Tom?
Yes, I'll start sharing my screen again.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, so kind of the last piece of this, I wanted to explain kind of each individual's roles in this process. So the process of recovery isn't just on the athlete or just on the coach. The parents can be involved as well. So we've kind of touched on some of this stuff already, but the athlete's role is definitely holding yourself accountable and your teammates accountable. So we want you to kind of buy into the whole process of recovery. It's just not good enough to go out on the field and play and then say, oh, I'll stretch tomorrow or something like that. You need to buy into the process of recovery for your own body as well. And then actively incorporating recovery into your routine. So kind of touched on that just now, but making it a habit, and then that habit will come second nature and you will do it automatically. So working that into your routine, just like injury prevention and nutrition are key things for recovery. And then listening to your body. So if you feel like your body is starting to break down, or if you have a recent injury, not pushing through that. The pain and the injury is what's telling you not to kind of push through that. So listening to your body is a huge thing, especially if you're kind of in your adolescent years. You're doing a lot of growing and your body's trying to figure out how to coordinate itself. So listening to your body's changes and what it's telling you is a very important role. Then we move on to the parents' role. So obviously with traveling and tournaments, you want to plan ahead. Even if it's a home tournament, you want to plan ahead. So keeping a schedule and keeping kind of your athletes on a routine actually shows, it's been shown in research that athletes perform better on routines. So kind of planning ahead and keeping them there is an important role for the parents. And then obviously we touched on this earlier, but avoiding strenuous activities around the games. So, you know, if you're planning on moving from one house to another house, don't have your athlete move maybe that weekend. You know, don't have them pick up the couch or something like that in between games just because they're there and they're able. But there are obviously other activities to avoid as well. And then the coach's role. So this is a big one. Obviously incorporating injury prevention, which we touched on, FIFA 11 plus, and incorporating recovery routine as well. So we don't want just to throw that all at the athletes. We want to be able to kind of guide them through that process if needed. And then providing a detailed schedule around the competitions. So making sure your parents and players know exactly what's going on and where to be and when to be there. That will help them greatly to kind of plan ahead for the traveling and the tournament. So that's a key thing for coaches. And then increase your buy-in. So look to your leaders on your team and have them kind of echo you as a coach on recovery. That's a good way to increase buy-in throughout the entire team, and then reinforce good behavior. So if somebody is buying in, reinforce that with, you know, some sort of reward or, you know, some sort of privilege or something like that, to where that good behavior is getting reinforced. And then, as we touched on a little bit earlier, keeping an eye on training loads. Obviously, this is the coach's responsibility to make sure the athletes aren't overtrained and you're not putting too much load on the athlete. And that's all I have.
Okay. Well, if there's any other questions, we'll stay on and certainly throw them in the chat if you'd like, and we'll check that in just a second. In summary, I just jotted down some notes, some thoughts that I had that might be worth just repeating. So the static stretching is, as opposed to the dynamic stretching, I think we see often more dynamic stretching after matches than we do the static stretching. So I think that's a very helpful point, and certainly worth coaches and athletes to pay attention to do a little bit of research on their own, so that they know if their team isn't doing that kind of activity, the static stretching, the players can do that on their own. Foam rolling, the 2 to 3 sets, 30 seconds at a time, hitting the big muscle groups, avoiding joints and sensitive tendons. What we do between games is important. We may have a 3-hour lull between games, and what we do there is important. So rest, relax, and refuel the body. Sleep, 9 to 11 hours for athletes. Certainly the load you put on your body will require more. And I know, having had kids and a daughter still that's in playing, that the phone and everything, the social media that may rob them of some very valuable sleep is something they need to put away and get rid of, so that they can get sleep at night, because that will definitely help and aid in their recovery. Nutrition, the pre, during, and post type of nutritions and what to do, the right types of foods to have, what to avoid. And then the hydration, which obviously starts well before the competition, but certainly during and then post competition. So those 6 items are things that I took away from the great presentation that you guys put on today. I know that from my perspective as the director of coaching, we have an opportunity to be role models for our players as coaches. And I think we need to model good behavior, right? And as parents too. I know that sometimes I'd love to go out to get a good burger in between games while I'm watching my daughter play, or a pizza, but that's not good for them. And I think we need to, certainly make sure that the menu items that are at the restaurants we go to, offer them something that's sensible and that's going to help in their recovery. So being good role models, and, as parents and as coaches, players that are on, I know we've got some players on, and you have to be self-advocates for yourself, and you have to make this part of your routine. The more serious you get, the older you get, the more work you put into your sport or sports. You have to take an active part in that, and be an advocate for yourself and make sure that you're doing the right things. So those are just some takeaways, some thoughts from me. I do have a couple other questions. If I could throw these out. Here's a good one about ice baths. Curious about ice baths. Anybody from the team could jump in and give us your thoughts?
Yeah, so recently ice has been kind of on the downslope. I think there's been some articles in 2019 that said as far as injury recovery goes, ice should be kind of pushed back until later stages to kind of allow for the body to naturally swell and bring kind of those healing attributes to the area. And as far as for recovery, I think that's somewhat of the same. So you kind of want a natural process, and the ice baths aren't necessarily going to go deep enough into a tissue to make a difference as far as soreness or lactic acid. It may feel good and numb the area for, an initial phase, but there hasn't been evidence to show that they're necessarily good in the long-term recovery aspect.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question. Can you speak to some of the signs of overtraining that parents can look for? I know we certainly do a lot of carting around and getting our kids to this activity, that activity. Are there some things to keep an eye out for when it comes to overtraining?
Yeah, so you definitely want to give your athlete plenty of time to recover after each sport. I know there are multiple sport athletes out there, so but as far as overtraining, some of the signs that you'll see is some overuse injuries, perhaps maybe some muscle injuries, maybe even starting to lead into stress fractures or things of that nature as well. Or you might just see kind of mental burnout as well.
Okay, great. Here's another question. Any good guidelines for acceptable loads, intensity, and number of practices with games, with a game over the weekend? I can just, Pat, just touch on that just a little bit. That is such a massive topic. We did do a webinar probably about 6 to 9 months ago, and Kirk Nelson, who's the head associate coach at Missouri State, is very big into periodization, and I'll try to get that presentation back on the website so you guys can take a look at it. But any other general thoughts on that from your team? Acceptable loads. It's a pretty complicated kind of mix of information. So, but go ahead, Tom, if any of you have any thoughts on that.
I do not really have any thoughts or additions from what you said. I mean, it is a pretty big topic, and I'm not necessarily an expert at that either. So I can defer to Gabby or Paul if they want to touch on it, but I don't we can maybe make that a topic in the future.
Yeah, I would love to. I think it's something that, especially with the amount of activity that our kids play and participate in, it's really, really important. And I think as coaches, it's a topic that people spend years studying to help us with. And so I think it's something we definitely can talk about doing a separate presentation on, and maybe get some resources for people.
Sure.
Okay,
I've been, sorry to interrupt, I've been going back to look at the lactate question that was going. I have an exercise physiology background too, and so I wanted to answer that question. So what I could find, so our lactate threshold, where basically our body can no longer clear the lactate that's building up, for most people is between 70 to 80% of our max heart rate. And so in studies where they looked at like what rate of exercise clears lactic acid the fastest, was obviously just below that threshold. As we get the heart pumping and get the blood circulating, as long as we're not building more lactate, we're clearing and circulating. So it was, kind of up to 70%. Obviously for some athletes, if they're muscularly tired, that feels like a pretty hard effort after a game. But that's kind of what the research that I found was, basically the harder that the athlete works, the quicker the lactate is cleared, as long as they aren't exceeding that 70% and then building more. So hopefully, Thomas, that answers your question a little bit.
so that 70% is kind of the threshold.
That's the threshold where most people will start building it up rather than clearing it.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks for that. I appreciate the clarification.
Sure.
And maybe there's one more question in here, and then I'm going to throw something out too. What are the thoughts on being in a pool afterwards? I know that, we want to avoid kids swimming and having that activity of, playing water polo or just clowning around in a pool. But I have heard some people talk about how being in water in a restful, relaxing way for small amounts of time after an activity can help in recovery. Can any of you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. Yeah, I can agree. I mean, I can agree with you on the restful activity in a pool. As far as it's good activity, they're not necessarily building that lactic acid like Rachel just mentioned. So that could definitely clear some of the soreness. But at the same time, I think that should be pretty closely monitored, because, you get a few athletes in the pool together and they start having fun and jumping around and, trying to do some cannonballs and all that stuff, and swimming and playing, games and all that. So I think there's a very fine line. And then also, if the pool's outdoor, then you don't want to be out in the sun for too long either. So, but there are some good kind of, just resistance walking underwater, or, even doing some dynamic kind of leg swings underwater. Just a little bit of resistance to that muscle activation can be a good thing, but not necessarily swimming or playing in a pool.
Okay, so the key being supervised, obviously, and then duration of how long. I couldn't imagine it being more than 20 to 30-ish minutes inside a pool to get the benefits from that in a relaxed state. So, okay, fantastic. And then here's another question. Should athletes have a certain amount of downtime with no games practices each year? That's a great question. I think that some of our athletes play more and practice and train more than some of the top athletes in the world. The loads that we put on these players, the lack of downtime is absolutely amazing to me. And the top athletes in the world don't do that to their bodies. So any thoughts on that?
Yes, the answer is yes. There should be some downtime where they take a break, especially at the younger ages. Once they get into kind of 16, 17, 18, they can start to train all year round in one sport. But before then, we want to have a diversified kind of portfolio of sports. So kind of doing that cross training where they're not playing the same sport over and over again. And that's going to reduce those overuse injuries that pop up as an athlete is growing. But yeah, we definitely don't want to specialize in one sport at an early age, and taking some time off is a good thing. You know, even the best, just like you mentioned, even the best athletes take time off of their sport and take that time to recover and rebuild and work on other things.
Yeah, we certainly live in a day and age of specialization where these players at such young ages are just doing one sport to maximize potential and to quote unquote succeed in that particular sport. And that specialization is can lead to, you know, overuse injuries in that particular sport or whatever. So definitely something that I think as coaches, as parents, we have to wrestle with, you know, when we talk about our kids participating in other sports, other activities, shutting down for after a fall season, shutting down for 3-4 weeks and letting kids be kids and letting their bodies recover are all excellent ideas and thoughts that hopefully as coaches and parents, you know, we encourage to have conversations and get philosophies. This is the time of year when so many kids are out looking for new clubs. Tryout weekend was just upon us. And I always recommend that parents speak to coaches and ask them some of these questions. What are their thoughts? What are their philosophies on these things? How do they handle recovery? Is it a coach that is going to take their kids to 4 or 5 tournaments in a period of a 3-month season, and on top of that play 12 league games? So I think those are all questions that parents have to ask those coaches, and coaches have to be thoughtful and have a plan in place so that they can protect the athletes and put them in an environment where they're going to be safe and allow them to maximize their potential and their development.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, recently there was a study done for NCAA about sports specialization, and I can't remember the exact number, but I think less than 20% of athletes that played in the NCAA specialized in a sport. So that means over 80% of athletes played different sports throughout high school. So if your kid is wanting to go play in college, have them play other sports, because it's actually going to make them an overall better athlete and probably a healthier athlete too.
Sounds like great advice and a great study. I guess we've hit all the questions in the chat box. Why don't we just go around the horn if anybody on your team has closing thoughts or something to say, and then we'll kind of wrap it up.
Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone. And I noticed another question in the chat. The FIFA 11 Plus is accessible online. And if you just Google FIFA 11 Plus, it'll pop up the European version. But you can also go to the Young Athletes Center website, and we should have the FIFA 11 Plus on our website. So.
From the nutrition end, do take a look at those handouts that Tom put in the chat box, because those have a lot of specific foods. You know, I talked about grams of this or grams of that, but it really helps to see what that is in a portion size of a specific kind of food. So there's a couple of those that have lists of foods or charts of foods if you're just trying to think of some ideas to bring into your team or to give the parents some specific ideas. So do look at those. And I was just looking, there's another comment, but yeah, it was great presenting. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys again. It's great to come out today and speak to you guys a little bit. We look forward to future talks as well.
Thank you. Do we still have Paul online? I'm wondering if he's still stretching and rolling out over there.
He had to step out, but
Okay.
no, he's no longer stretching. He did his 90 seconds.
Sounds good. Well, thank you all to your entire team, Tom. I mean, we appreciate passing this information on to our members, and anything we can do to help our players have better experiences in sport is fantastic. So just want to thank you. Once this is downloaded, I will go ahead and get this webinar up on the website. So check back in the next 24 hours. We should have it up there. And thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.